Cool, please join me on the karakia on page 5. Mea karakia tātou. Tēnei o, te haukai nei o taku, tapawai. Ko te haukai nuku, ko te haukai rangi, ko te haukai a tau tupuna a tānei nui a rangi. Ka piki ti ai ki ngā rangi tūhaha, ki te tiho o mā nono. Ka rokohina atu rā, ka io mātua kōri anaki, ka tikinga mai ngā kiti o te wānanga. Ko te kiti tuauri, ko te kiti tuatia, ko te kiti aranui. Ka tiri a, ka pōpoa, ka putu mai e ho, ko te ira tangata, ki te whaio, ki te ao marama, tihei mauri ora. We have no apologies today. Moving on to public comment. I don't believe we've got any members of the public wishing to speak, but obviously welcome anyone that is watching us online. Moving on to item number 4, conflict of interest declaration. Call on any members that might have an interest to declare. Councillor Lewis, Deputy Mayor Lewis.
I just live in a heritage precinct.
Cool, thank you. Any other members? Great. We'll move on to item number 5, which is a submission on making it easier to build granny flats discussion document. This is on page 8 of our agenda. I'd like to welcome Tim Johnson, Head of Planning, to speak to the item. He pātai tō ngā mima. Does any member have any questions? Councillor Mitchell's got a question? No? Hey, do you want to speak to the paper first? Yeah, if there's...
I'm happy to take it, obviously, as read, but I will just invite Linda Chi from the building team. So we worked on the submission collaboratively. Linda dealt with the building aspect and I did with the RMA aspect. So.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. There's some really good thought that's gone into this submission, and one of the things that's discussed in there a bit is risk. And I was just kind of wondering, you know, a few years ago with the leaky buildings, that risk fell back onto councils because they had consented those buildings. So in this instance, where consents are no longer going to be required, who would be liable if an issue like that arose?
Thank you so much for that question. Ultimately, if the exempt building work goes the way that with other exempt building work, which building work does not require building consent, the ultimate liability falls with the building owner. But because of the submission mentioned, there's a notification process, we know about it. So in my view, there might potentially say you have a duty care, you know about it, what action have you done about it? So yeah.
Just adding on, I think one of the points we have made in the submission is things like that need to be crystal clear, and whatever the final, there has to be an acknowledgement of where compliance falls, and it has to be very clear. So.
Any other questions from members? Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Just in relation to the small homes, well, 60 square metres isn't that small really for some of our back gardens. It's 10, no, yeah, radio, stick there too. There's a comment in here about plumbing and joining the services and the cost that would be on the small homes and fitting in regulatory. I just wanted to know, it's probably an aside from the submission, but are there any, do we have anything in our district plan that why couldn't a home have incinerator, toilet and its own water system that's not plugged into the system and operate?
Basically, the district plan does require you to connect to services. If you weren't doing that, then you can apply for resource consent. So there is an option to have alternative methods, but that would be dealt with through a resource consent. So you have to service a dwelling. If you want a different option, then that would get assessed to make sure that obviously it is fit for purpose.
Any other members with questions? Great. I would like to move, thank you officers, I'd like to move that the committee approves the submission as set out in officers' report on behalf of Hutt City Council, noting that the key submission points are summarised. I won't read through all of those, but they are there on page 8. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Morgan. Anyone wishing to speak? Councillor Morgan.
Kia ora. I just wanted to say thanks for this because I think for me around that risk factor and not complying or the compliance factor was huge. So I think you've done some really good work to make sure that it's safeguarded and we're safeguarded as Hutt City Council. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? No, I did just want to note that it was quite nice having a little bit of time to actually put a lot of thought into a submission and actually be able to go through our usual process. The amount of submissions we've had to be doing retrospectively lately because of really tight deadlines with the government. It's quite refreshing to have a normaler one. Cool, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. Now move on to an update on the large lot residential zone for the proposed district plan. This is on page 16 of the agenda. I'd like to ask Kathleen Haylock, our principal policy planner, to speak to the item. You don't look like Kathleen.
No, not Kathleen. Kathleen Haylock is leading this piece of work for the district plan review. She's our principal policy planner. Unfortunately, she's unable to make it today, but I co-authored this report with her, so I'm happy to speak to it. Yes, so it is just an update on where we have gotten to with the large lot residential zone since the draft district plan. The main change is really with the location of where the zone would apply, and that's largely because of a change to the way that we would address slope stability. That would now be addressed through a slope stability overlay with rules and provisions in the natural hazards chapter, rather than relying on the zone to deal with that issue. Other than that, the range of activities, the type of built development that would be provided for by this zone would be relatively unchanged from where it was at in the draft district plan. So, other than that, happy to take questions.
Cool, thank you. Do any members have a question? I've got one before anyone else jumps in. What's the process in terms of consultation with those that have engaged with us through the draft district plan, potentially asking to be in the zone or out of the zone? Will they hear anything from us until the proposed plan goes public later this year, which may or may not have taken on board what they wanted? Are we planning on, yeah, it'd be good just to know how we're corresponding with those people.
So we haven't reached back out to them after the draft district plan. There are some people who have taken a particular interest and have followed up on their submission with us, and we've explained the situation on that on a case-by-case basis. But as far as going back to them on the outcome of their submissions, we haven't done that. So the next time that they would hear from us would be when the proposed district plan is notified.
And obviously the committee's not seen any changes in terms of where or wouldn't it be in. Have officers already made their recommendations on which submissions they'll make amendments to? Or
so I guess officers' opinions have been made up for most of the sites where people requested to be rezoned from large lot residential. It's normally from large lot residential to medium density residential is what people have requested. And for most sites where people raise that issue in their submissions, we've come to an opinion on what the zone should be. There's still some final ones where we're working through what they should be. So that work isn't finalised, even though it's not far from being complete.
And when we do notify the proposed plan later this year, will there be any individual comms to those residents that, hey, we've taken your feedback on board, it might not be what you like, but here's your next opportunity in front of independent commissioners who will be making a decision, as opposed to seeing it and thinking, oh, you haven't listened, I won't bother engaging with stage 2 of the process?
The plans for how we'd go about getting in touch with those people, I suppose we don't have any plans at this stage. We can reach out to them, particularly these people where the proposed district plan would be a notable change from what they saw in the draft. We can. I think if it's not a lot of that.
Yeah, I think if it's not a lot of work, it would be really useful to go back to the people that have engaged on their individual property questions. If they haven't really got in touch with us during the process, like you said, some now have really proactively, but yeah, I'm just trying to put myself in their shoes. If the next I knew was the proposed plan, you look at it and you go, nothing's changed, and I've not heard anything back since my last submission. Is it worth making another submission through the RMA process, which may get more influence and change through independent commissioners rather than us? But yeah, keen to hear any other questions or thoughts, Councillor Edward.
Does that present you with a problem? As I understand it, when we went out with the draft, we didn't have the slope stability overlays, which are going to impact some properties as well. And so if you contact these ones that have had a change, and someone had looked at the draft plan and thought, I'm sweet as, and then finds out there's a slope stability overlay over their property, they're going to say, well, how come I wasn't contacted? Yeah, it's kind of a question of where do you draw the line over making special contact like that.
Yeah, it absolutely is a question of where do you draw the line, because there are a lot of people that are affected in a particular way by something that is in the will be in the proposed district plan, and it does get to a point where that becomes a real administrative burden for the team to undertake. Yes, so you're right, a line does need to be drawn about how significant is the change or how specific is the change that warrants us reaching out to them specifically. I think both of those situations would be manageable, both reaching out to the people where their zoning has changed because of the slope stability overlay being introduced, as well as those people who specifically reached out when we engaged on the draft district plan.
Sorry, I was just jumping in from the back seat. But I mean, what we could do is a similar exercise to what we did on the draft district plan. If you remember, we identified a list of specific people to contact. I think we could do that exercise, but also bearing in mind if it gets to the point where we're writing to everyone in the city anyway. But hopefully it's helpful. I think the exercise we went through for the draft, we could do again in terms of significant impacts, and then have a look at what that means in terms of contacting direct neighbours, so direct property owners, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think if it's not too onerous, that would make sense. I think for me, in terms of drawing the line, would be if someone's engaged with us, made a submission, has just heard nothing now until we notify the proposed plan, they might feel, especially if it comes out and nothing's changed, they might just think like, oh, why am I even bothering in the process? And might not even make a submission through the RMA, whereas the whole point of the draft was trying to encourage more feedback through the proposed plan. But likewise, slope stability, sites are significant to Māori, things that weren't in the draft, I think probably do need to be highlighted if it's not too onerous to do so. Some of the things where we've changed lines on maps slightly, maybe less so, but yeah, probably pretty comfortable with officers' opinion on what's the material change. Obviously, there's been some change to the tsunami risk with the new flood mappings that's come out since the draft, and a few other things around mixed what we did the last commercial and residential together along around by the hospital, that sort of stuff. If it's been a material change, would make sense. But yeah, I'm really just thinking of like how we close that feedback loop to people that have engaged with the process that have now just heard nothing. We're not going to write to each one of them saying, here's the outcome of your feedback, but yeah.
Again, contacting the number of people that made a submission isn't a huge task, because from memory it was 300 or so. So you know, actually going back to people who made submissions isn't huge, so we can give them a heads up to say you made a submission, you need to have a look at what's in there, that's easy. But then there is the additional group of slope stability is a good one. Hey, I checked the draft, I wasn't in a hazard area, now I am. That's that sort of additional list of people we need to decide who gets a letter and who not. So I think I'm rambling along saying, yeah, we understand, and we can work something up and come back to you on that.
Yeah, they are quite two different groups that would need two quite different letters. Even the group that's engaged with us, pointing them to where that summary of feedback was, because that really summarises their thoughts, and then the papers that we've done since then. But what most importantly here is the proposed plan. Any thoughts? This is the place to do it.
Yeah, we can do that. We wrote, I think, 15 different types of letters last time. But no, they do need different messaging, and yeah, understand that.
Yeah, I think despite the public feedback we have had at this table, getting more letters is better than getting no letters. Councillor Mitchell.
Nathan.
Thank you. It's a bit tangential, I think, to what we were just discussing, but I wondered if there was a way that like our rates tool is really popular. People can go in and put in their own address and see their own rates and the changes that are made between our rates. If there was I don't know if it's technically possible, a tool where I could put in my own address and it could tell me this is the operative district plan and this is what changes are proposed that affect my property, and make it something that all of our residents actually can go in and see for themselves what changes there are, rather than us sending out 15,000 letters or something like that. I don't know if it's possible or not.
With the new e-plan tool that we brought in last year, it's a functionality that we haven't turned on yet, but it's something that with a bit of effort we can make work with our operative district plan. It has the function that you can type in an address and it will come up with the relevant parts of the district plan for your property. And that function will also be available with the proposed district plan once that's released as well. It's a little bit complicated in being able to compare the two because the proposed district plan will be in such a different format from the operative. If someone that's invested and wants to put the time into it will be able to get into that and have a look at it, and we'll be able to call council staff and we can walk them through that. But there will be the ability to look at that at a property specific level.
Just adding, it is also you bet people checking the operative district plan, but then they also need to check the draft district plan because it's changed from the operative to the draft to the proposed. So it might actually also confuse things as well. But I certainly think that strategy of making sure we're contacting the right people is a sound one.
Am I right in assuming that there will be a paper coming to this committee before the proposed plan in terms of like the comms plan of how we engage, in terms of like we've talked about some letters now, but making something that's similar to the rates tool, or with something that's really obvious that you can go and type in your address and see your rules, because that's a new thing. 99% of the city wouldn't know that's even a tool we have now on our website. It'd be good maybe to get like the comms plan for how we're planning on engaging. I assume it's probably already what Bill will be being worked on, but it'd be good for us to see it, especially if we're talking more letters going out to people.
Yeah, what we do, I guess we'll image or repeat what we did with the draft, which we did exactly that. We set out a comms plan, and I think we'll just build on what we did for the draft. But yes, we can bring that back to you. Yep.
Perfect. Any other questions on large lot residential? On a bit of a tangent, but no, great. I'll move the motion then that the committee receives and notes the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Edwards. Anyone wishing to speak? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just really briefly to acknowledge the decision to move those slope hazards out into the hazards section. And I think in terms of comms and encouraging our residents to know what the district plan says about their properties, I think particularly everyone should be checking the hazards that apply to their property and thinking about what their response to those hazards might be in future. It's really great to have that data available to people, regardless of the district plan. But yeah, something we can put in our comms messaging is that we now have this suite of maps of different kind of hazards, and you can see exactly what applies to you and your neighbourhood.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. Even proactively, even between now and December, just doing a press release on the fact that we've now switched to an e-plan. Not many councils have that in the country. We're already, the operative plan is now an e-plan. The new one will be an e-plan, and you can do exactly what Councillor Mitchell said is actually, I think, being a bit geeky, but I think is quite a newsworthy story, but maybe not everyone agrees. Anyone else wishing to speak? Cool. There'll be some district plans that already did. Cool, I'll move the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. We'll now move on to item number 7, which is an update on the historic heritage chapter for the district plan. This is on page 21 of the agenda. I'd like to ask Nathan to stay at the table to speak to the item.
I think I also have Andrew Banks from Boffamuskel, who's been assisting with us with this topic for the district plan review since the beginning of the year. Andrew, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, your background, your job title at Boffamuskel.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. My name's Andrew Banks. I'm a senior planner at Boffamuskel. I've been working since the beginning of the year to assist the council with the heritage provisions. And yeah, for the last 3 years, I've been working for various councils around the region on district planning topics. So thank you for having me.
So This paper, I guess similar to the last paper, is an update on what's happened with the Historic Heritage chapter for the District Plan Review, focusing largely on the work that's been done since the draft District Plan. A lot of that work, that work has included a review of the approach that was taken for identifying heritage building structures and areas, and the evidence base to support those building structures and areas that had been identified. One point I'd like to note about the paper is there's an attachment to the paper which is supposed to be the criteria that's listed in the regional policy statement that we're to use for identifying historic heritage. We've accidentally included some additional pages in that attachment. So pages 28 to 33 were not meant to be included in that attachment. That's an earlier draft of the actual report. So the attachment is meant to be pages 34 and 35 only. Other than that, I'm happy to take questions.
Cool, thank you. Any councillors have any questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just a question about, you mentioned you worked across a number of councils on heritage policy. How consistent is our approach and methodology here to what other councils are doing to identify heritage properties and put rules around them?
Well, actually, various councils are at different stages in their plan making cycle. What I would say is that they're all driven by the regional policy statement, which is the attachment that that Nathan was just referring to, and that that somewhat unifies certainly where district plans are required to head under the RMA. So, and that is very much what we've been focused on in our work and getting this chapter up and running.
The other question I had was quite a specific one. It's on page 26 in paragraph G. It's talking about demolition of heritage building and structures, discouraging that, of course, recognising that in certain circumstances demolition may be necessary, including when there's an immediate threat to life. One of the things that seems to manifest itself with heritage properties is that they get neglected and they reach that status through neglect, which is very different from, say, if there was an earthquake and we had to demolish some dangerous buildings. So is there anything that we can do to distinguish between those two situations? One where a building's been damaged by an earthquake and it needs to come down because of the health risk, immediate health risk, and two, and I guess this is where my focus is, anything we can do to prevent buildings reaching that same condition through neglect. Is there anything we can do to intervene and stop that process?
The problem of demolition by neglect is a challenging one to deal with, but the solution to it is actually what you alluded to in the second half of your question. And so the way you can't have a rule that, you can't necessarily have a rule in a plan that says you must maintain your building, because plans are about enabling people to do things, not requiring people to do things. So the solution that we've tried to focus on for the chapter is to reduce the risk of demolition by neglect by enabling people to sustainably continue to use their heritage buildings, so removing some barriers. And so examples of that are what we have looked at in response to submissions on the drafts, actually making it easier for people to do things like retrofit, double glazing, install solar panels, for example. Those are things that enable people to continue to live in their buildings. And that is, I guess, the positive way of trying to avoid demolition by neglect, by not putting too many barriers, unnecessary barriers in place for people who own heritage buildings. So, yeah.
Any other members have any questions? No. Cool. I'll move the recommendations in, and that the committee receives and notes the report and directs officers to complete the historic heritage chapters for the proposed district plan. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mitchell, any debate? I'd like to put the motion then. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. Moving on to an update on overlays in the transport chapter of the district plan, which is on page 36 of our agenda. I'd like to ask Peter McDonald, our senior policy planner, to speak to the item.
Kia ora. Yeah, this is an update on two overlays which are proposed for the transport chapter. The first overlay is for highly constrained roads, and the purpose is to manage the effects from development from worsening the safe operation of a small number of roads. Paragraph 20 refers to some ongoing work. I can now update that we've selected 5 roads to include in the overlay, and these are Natouche Road, Belmont, Liverton Road, Belmont, West Hill Road, Point Howard, Waitoho Road, York Bay, and Mackenzie Road, Eastbourne. The second overlay is the specified high trip generator exemption overlay, which provides exemptions from high trip generator assessment. The purpose of this is to support density around train stations and some local centres, and it also recognises that activities in these locations might not generate as much vehicle trips, which those provisions are trying to manage. Still working to identify the extent of the overlay, which was initially looking at areas within a short walking distance of rail stations, but we're now also looking at including some larger local centres. Any questions?
Any members got any questions? Councillor Edwards.
I'm starting to get confused by some of the jargon that used in our district plan, and I understand the exemption overlay for specified high trip generator thing. Makes good sense to me with public transport stuff nearby. Is the high trip generator provisions the provisions that we're going to use when there are new subdivisions in streets where and there's no off-street parking, and we're seeing all these sorts of problems, $39 million bill for council to deal with the ones that are already passed? There was going to be a mechanism in the district plan to try and deal with that and get financial contributions and stuff like that. That is...
Yeah, so we did look at that in the high trip generator provisions, and some of the things we did to respond to that is to reduce the threshold generally for residential activities. It was 60 dwellings in the operative, it's now 20 dwellings.
Right.
However, that threshold would be exempt in this overlay. The other thing that would apply outside that overlay is the assessment matters give direction to, I guess, addressing some of those issues you're talking about.
So just to make it really clear, so that the draft district plan will have some exemptions within these areas. This overlay removes those exemptions so that the higher trip is considered.
This overlay provides exemptions to thresholds. So specifically for residential activity, outside this overlay, if it's outside this overlay and not in a centre zone or a metropolitan zone, there would be a threshold of 20 residential units. That would be the threshold where you'll need high trip generator assessment. Within the overlay, that threshold would not apply.
So you'd need a high trip assessment regardless, or you wouldn't need one?
You wouldn't need one if you're in the overlay.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
And when you talk about high trip generating activity, are we talking about the number of cars on the road, like the amount of traffic there is, congestion, or does it apply across all traffic related things, including parking? And I'm thinking particularly about parking actually, because what we've seen already is that the townhouses that we hoped would be built near our railway stations and no one would have a car. Everyone's got a car. And if I built a 60-unit place near the train station and I didn't put in any car parks, I think we can, at this stage, sadly, expect 60 cars to be parked somewhere on the streets outside. So does it apply to parking, or is it just to do with actual traffic management and number of cars on the road?
A bit of both. So the thresholds are trying to target activities which have a high level of vehicle trip generation. The provisions around the exemption does include a maximum on car parking numbers. So if you're exceeding 10 parking spaces, you would require a high trip generator assessment if you're in the overlay. And that's sort of trying to, I guess, encourage activities that don't rely on private vehicles in this overlay.
Yeah, and I think that's where my concern lies, that if they're putting in more than 10 car parks, they'll be assessed. If they're putting in fewer than 10 car parks, but still 60 houses, that won't be assessed. And there's going to be a huge parking impact, I think, of those things. I mean, the statement in here that there may be reduced effects of motor vehicle trip generation for these activities where public transport is readily available. That's what we've kind of been hoping for the past few years with just the townhouses that are going in, and we're not seeing it, sadly. Yeah, so I'm more concerned that I totally understand why if you've got more than 10 car parks, you get assessed for trip generation, but my concern is actually the opposite thing. When there aren't enough car parks, what are going to be the impacts of those developments? And if they're not being assessed, we won't know until it's a problem on the streets.
Yeah, I guess, well, obviously we can't have any provisions related to providing car parks. Essentially, yeah, I guess it's coming down to trying to promote activity near railway stations where it might have, encourage sort of more reliance on public transport where those opportunities are.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think that situation that you're talking about is a situation that will exist, well, currently exists everywhere in the district. What this overlay attempts to do is encourage those developments that can happen to happen in the place where we want them to happen most, because they are the areas where, appreciate that some people still have cars, but that there will be less reliance on cars in those areas. So it's trying to remove one of those barriers in the areas where you want your intensification to happen most by removing this barrier of requiring a high trip generator assessment.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Thoughts, yes. For me, visually, without seeing an overlay, it's hard to picture how it would work. And just to get an example in my mind, I can hear all the words, and I'm thinking, okay, trying to figure that out, how it would actually apply. And I'm thinking about cumulative effect of a lot doing something, and then another developer does that. How do you justify all that? How do you work with that sort of thing and the effects, if it's in areas, out of areas, and that's, yeah.
Yeah, I guess still working on identifying where those areas are, but the idea is it will be pretty contained. So, for example, around rail stations, we've been looking at a 300-metre walking kind of catchment. Yeah.
Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, just thinking about this, and Councillor Edwards alluded to it, the costs that we're now finding where we need car parks, that there aren't car parks. Does this address that particular situation with development contributions? Is that the way it's going to kick in?
It won't be addressed by these provisions, being exempt from high trip generator assessment. So, yeah, like I said, this is where we're sort of trying to encourage dwellings to locate as, yeah, one of the more favourable locations being closer to train stations and centres.
So do we know yet what the thinking is of what the mechanism will be? I'm thinking like the likes of Milne, Biddle, Johnson, we've just spent close to $1 million widening those streets so people can park off street. How do we stop that from happening? Because that's not a good outcome for anyone. The developers probably saved $1 million by not providing the car parking on site at the expense of ratepayers who've had to pay for that.
Yeah, I guess that's not been addressed within this exemption. Where those developments are occurring outside of the overlay, that would be addressed by, first of all, it's more likely to require high trip generation assessment by that lower threshold outside of the overlay. And the assessment matters do provide a bit of direction to consider those issues. I can't recall the exact wording of those assessment matters, but.
Okay, last one from me. So does this exemption make it more permissive to do more higher density closer to the train stations? Is that the intent?
Yes, it removes the need, like, I guess an intensive residential development would likely require resource consent anyway. What this is doing is it's removing the requirement to, say, engage a transport engineer to do a transport assessment as part of their application.
Cool. And the key for that is we've also dropped the threshold from 60 to 20. So the likes of some of these ones we've just been discussing, they are more than 20. If they were to be done under the new district plan, they would require a traffic engineer to do them. But we're saying, hey, if you actually did that right at Waterloo Station, you wouldn't need to do a traffic engineer assessment.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. Originally, we did in the latest plan change, we went along traffic corridors, and remember Wainuiomata was earmarked for high density as well because it had transport routes in and out. Will those major transport routes be covered, do you think, by this as well?
Not really looking at transport routes other than just around train stations. Yeah.
Cool. Any final questions from any members? Tim.
I was just going to add, we obviously have got the potential for a briefing coming up with a range of topics, and I think we'll just to add this to the list so that we can bring the maps back to give you a bit more direction about the areas we're talking about. I can't remember the street that has come up as an issue in recent times, but for instance, that is outside of this overlay area, so in the future that would be caught, but I think that's useful for you to have a knowledge of that. So we'll add that to another briefing so we can explain this a bit more. I think hopefully we've got the concept of what we're trying to do on board. Just need to see a bit more detail, but it's a bit caught between a rock and a hard place. We want people to live near to train stations. The idea is that this is pushing that. We can't control people owning cars, and that's just a fundamental thing. But the idea, if we're helping people live close to train stations, then we're pushing behaviour change. And just the other thing is, all of these developments will still pay development contributions. So we are still, if they're not providing car parks, or if they are, we are still collecting development contributions from them for roading improvements. Yeah. So.
I thought the transport aspects of development contributions were knocked out, in fact.
John, correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't, the development contribution policy, part of it is towards roading and transport. That is still collected.
Through you, Chair. So yes, so there is still some transport in there in the new DC policy. I think that there was also that bit of work that we put forward around subdivision, roading, the retrospective ones. So we're still waiting on a Waka Kotahi decision on where that sits. So.
Cool. Any final questions from anyone? No, thank you, officers. I'd like to move the motion then that the committee receives and notes the report. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Shaw. Thank you. Any members wishing to speak? Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, I think Tim said it well when he said we're up against a rock and a hard place. I think we're doing all the right things in this area. We know we want to encourage this sort of development around public transport, and I think the actual solutions or the messages lie outside the district plan, and it's a topic of mine recently, and I feel quite strongly about it. We need to get people to understand that if they are buying apartments that don't have off-street parking, don't rely on us clearing the way so you can have parking near your place in the streets, because we might need that road space. So make your decision kind of knowing, and this is why I think it's a bit dangerous to be talking about residents-only parking. We need to be quite careful about our messaging in this area and let people make their decisions on what units they're buying and knowing what their transport needs are.
Thank you. Any other members? Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, just reiterating my concern. I know this is just a noting paper about, I guess, being mindful about perverse outcomes of some of the things we put in place. Like, I'm all for encouraging the kind of development we want near to our railway stations. Just reading this rule as it reads, you know, there's a assessment required if you provide for more than 10 spaces, which is waived if you provide less than 10 spaces. So it's actually an incentive there to not provide more than 10. And we're seeing a lot of these townhouse developments where there might be 18 townhouses, 12 car parks, or they might be cutting their car parks down further just to get to waive an assessment here. So, you know, I think there are surely things we can do to incentivize people to live near railway stations and public transport, and hopefully to live car free. I just feel like that this one, there may be a perverse incentive there for developers to not provide car parking, hoping that no one's going to have cars, and that we might see that the trend continue, that doesn't actually bear fruit. So yeah, just flagging that.
I know we're past questions, but am I right in thinking that the car parking is just one of the things that could trigger it? Like if you had 15, 20 dwellings with no car parking, would the assumption there be that each one of those has a car, and would that be enough to trigger it? So if say it's been dropped to 20, say there was 30, 25 townhouses going in, or is it really only on how many off-street car parks they're providing?
So I guess if you're a 30 unit development within the overlay with no car parking, then you would not require assessment under these provisions. And I'll just add, the other consideration in relation to this control on car parking is to manage the effects in areas where we're really trying to promote active transport networks as well. So I guess an activity with 10 or more car parks in very close to a train station would probably want to pick that up for assessing how that impacts on the network, those networks.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I think I do have similar concerns to Councillor Mitchell, but maybe it's something we can pick up in a workshop to see if there is another way around it. I kind of get the intent of making it harder outside of those zones and making it easier in the zones. But we know developers will do what they're doing because they're already doing it, and it just leads to a lot of angst with new residents and existing residents and ratepayers' back pocket when it comes to widening streets. Councillor Mitchell, round two.
Yeah, just a very small point. The other option is to assess everybody. So you are going to see the impacts of someone not providing any car parks. They're not just going to, be ignored.
Cool. Any other members wishing to speak? No, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. Thank you. We're now moving on to item number 8, the information item on the District Plan Forward Work Programme, which is on page 42 of the agenda. Do any members have any questions on this one? All very straightforward. Cool. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Briggs. Any members wishing to speak? No. All those in favour, please say aye. All against? Declare that carried. Moving on to item number 9, questions. I've received no questions. Moving on to item number 10, closing formalities. Me karakia tātou. Unu hia e te ru tapanui. Kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua i te ara takatū. Koi rā e rongo, whakaihira aki ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā kua wātea, hau pai mārie.